For this video, I'm just going to skip that preachy self-acceptance part where I say things like,
you shouldn't train to look good, you should just train to feel good.
I think both's fine. In fact, I train for many reasons and having a decent physique is just one of them. Also, you probably can't say that if like 90% of your thumbnails are you with no shirt on, even for videos in which you're wearing a shirt the whole time. I'm also sure that you don't need me to like pat you on the head and console you about the fact that your chest is probably never going to be like Mike Thurston's. If you're anything like me, I expect that you see things very matter-of-factly and you just want to make the best of what you have, and you're probably not going to cry about what you don't have, you know? Make the best of it and accept the rest of it. Okay, sentimental stuff out of the way. First, I just want to try and get some kind of definition for what constitutes bad genetics for bodybuilding. There are really two components to consider. First, structural things like your skeletal proportions and muscle insertions. This can make quite a big difference because although two people might be the same height and have the same body composition, one can appear much more muscular than the other. Second, the responsiveness to weight training. Put simply, two people can follow the exact same training regimen but gain vastly different amounts of muscle mass. If you look at some bodybuilding studies, I mean, hopefully you never have to because they can be proper boring, right? But if you ever do, then you'll see that sometimes people under the exact same circumstances can get almost unbelievably different results. Population-wise, it's probably along the lines of a normal distribution, where there's a roughly equal proportion of people with very good and very bad genetics, but the majority of people coalesce somewhere around the middle. The difficulty is that you can never really say for sure precisely how good or bad your genetics are, because there are so many other factors that contribute to the results that you get in the gym. The best idea you can get is if you have a training partner or close friend or relative who lives and trains very similarly to you, but seems to get very different results. Even then, you can only really make a judgment relative to each other and not the whole population. I'd say that we probably all think that we've got slightly worse genetics than we actually have, just because we are human and we'd like to attribute our gains to the hard work we put in rather than just luck. Now, if you are somebody with less favorable muscle building genetics, then the bad news is you probably can't be a bodybuilder, right? The good news is, statistically speaking, you probably don't want to be one. You probably just want to be in pretty good shape, right? Maybe even great shape. And that is certainly still possible. Nobody has bad enough genetics that they can't look impressive. So what do you do? Well, there are a few tweaks and extra considerations that you might need to make. First, you just might need to train more. Right? There are a few studies that have observed subjects not responding or responding very little to an initial training routine, but then as their workload is increased, they do begin to respond. Studies that use high numbers of sets per week seem to end up with a lower proportion of non-responders, which means that increasing your sets per week should probably be your first port of call. However, and this is a pretty big however, that's not always going to be possible. For a lot of people it is, you know, you might just have to train 4 times a week to get the results that somebody else can get in 3 days a week, right? And that's just how it is, and you have the choice of doing it or not doing it. But if you're already maxing out your gym time, then you might have to get a bit more inventive and try to get more productive muscle building stimulus into the same time frame. Recently, I made a video about how to train if you don't have much time, and most of the tips in that will help people in this situation. Final thing to say before we move on to the next one, this is a little bit weird and it probably doesn't apply to many people. However, if you're already training a lot, doing many sets per muscle per week, and you're not seeing results, you might actually benefit from training less. There are a few theories as to why some people might build less muscle in response to weight training than others, and one is to do with how some seem to have more of an inflammatory response to lifting. Right, I'm paraphrasing here because if I quoted the actual studies, it'd sound like, well, like this.
Overall, the widely disparate transcriptomes identified prior to resistance training among the 3 clusters support the notion that at least some of the inter-individual heterogeneity in propensity for resistance training induced myofiber hypertrophy is likely predetermined.
Yeah, that could have been said in like 5 words. Anyway, TLDR, gaining muscle isn't just about building muscle. You're pretty much always breaking down and building muscle to some extent. What you need is the right balance of the two. Yeah, you need a positive net balance. Now, some people might just be really good, or technically, maybe it's really bad at breaking down muscle to the point where they can't build enough to end up in a positive net balance. And for these people, training less might actually mean better gains overall. Second thing is, you might have to bulk for longer. If you build muscle more slowly, then you're going to have to spend longer doing it. It's really that simple. Now, theoretically, there's no reason that I know of, at least, for why you couldn't do lots of short gaining phases interspersed with short fat loss phases. Gain some muscle for a few months, lose a bit of fat for a month, repeat, right? And if you have decent genetics, you can probably get away with doing it like that. But in practice, for some reason that I'm not completely sure of, it just doesn't seem to be as efficient as longer bulking phases. If you look at all the top natty bodybuilders, some of them are taking like 1, 2, 5 year breaks from competing just so that they can spend all of that time trying to make some gains and then have some kind of competitive advantage when they finally return to competing. Maybe you lose some momentum in that transitional phase between bulking and cutting, or vice versa, or maybe it's something to do with never being fully committed to one goal and always having one eye on what's around the corner. I'm not really sure. If you are going to bulk for longer, then you have to make that possible by being a little bit more strict with it. Sadly, just because you don't have good genetics for building muscle fast, it doesn't mean you won't gain fat fast. You might not, but it's not a given. So you'll probably have to keep a little bit more control over your calories than most to allow yourself to bulk for longer without gaining excessive amounts of fat. Third, stick to a program. Usually people will lift for a good few years before ever trying to stick to an actual program. They might have a rough split, but if it's a push day, they'll just go in and make up a push day on the spot. Yeah, feel like a bit of incline bench today, cool, throw some incline bench in. Now again, for a lot of people, that is fine, right? But I'd say if you're not genetically blessed, it's probably a good idea to waste as little time as you can. And the structure and accountability that a program provides will help that. Part of it is really just being able to stick to regular exercises and rep ranges so that you can have a better grasp on how you're progressing or not progressing and when you should add some weight to the bar. It doesn't have to be the best program, and it certainly doesn't have to be one that you pay for, right? There's plenty of decent free shit floating around the internet, and you could probably even just watch a few YouTube videos and then put something together yourself that's still drastically better than nothing. This might be a bit biased because of my own experiences, but for me, I made most of my gains in 2 phases. My newbie phase when I first started lifting, and then the phase when I first started following programs. Fourth, try different stuff. Obviously, we see a lot of individual variance in how people respond to particular training protocols in muscle hypertrophy research. And if they're good studies, they have a large group of people following the exact same routine with as many variables controlled as possible. So we can probably say that a lot of that variance is down to genetic differences. But you have to be very strict about what conclusions you draw. You can look at the distribution of low, medium, and high responders, but all you can really say is that's how they responded to the specific training protocols in that study. It doesn't necessarily mean that if those training conditions were different, the same individuals would have responded in the same way. It's probably unlikely that someone who responds extremely well to high reps would then respond terribly to low reps. But it's definitely feasible that some low responders and medium responders might switch places, and some medium and high responders might switch places. Anecdotally, think about how sure of themselves some people are about their own experiences. If I make a joke about having no carbs, for example, I mean, it wouldn't be a joke for a start, but anyway, undoubtedly, somebody would comment saying something along the lines of, I started going really heavy and low rep and my carbs blew up. Trust me, bro, you should try it, right? And equally, some people would say, mate, trust me, the only thing that made my carbs grow was going very high rep, etc., right? I do 1,000 carb raises while I'm brushing my teeth, some shit like that, right? Now, some of these experiences are undoubtedly drenched in bias, but some will be legit and have some nuggets of truth in there. You're not gonna go from like 0 gains to being big Ramy, but it's possible, nay, probable, that you will respond differently to different training approaches. Okay, of course, a lot of this stuff applies to everyone else, but the point is, with less favorable genetics, you just have a little bit less room for, let's say, inefficiencies. Now, in general, I'm not too interested in being optimal, because I think most people can get the results that they're happy with just by focusing on the basics and repeating them for a long time. But the bottom line is, if you don't have the best genetics, then you're gonna have to be a little bit closer to optimal than everyone else. It doesn't mean lifting has to like take over your life or that the gains won't be worth it, although I suppose that's a personal judgment call. But it does mean that if your results are the main aim of your training, then you might have to be a bit more calculated and thought out when it comes to your training approach. Hope this helps anyway. That's all I've got for today. Cheers for watching again. Subscribe, like my shit, everything. By the way, my app is out soon, so watch out for it because it's going to be proper sick, and it's going to mean that you can probably never watch any of my videos again because you can just do what it tells you, because everything that I talk about is going to be incorporated into the program generation, the progression scheme, all the methods within it. Anyway, see you later.
Jordy Lenny is my hero.